The Kyle Lowry era is over in Miami, and scary Terry hours are set to begin. The news has just been announced that Lowry has been dealt to the Charlotte Hornets. We break down the deal, what it means for the Heat this season and beyond, and how Miami can continue to improve their roster. It's an emergency reaction live episode of Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to Locked On Heat, your daily podcast on the Miami Heat. I'm Wes Goldberg, editor at allyoucanheat.com. Joining me as always, longtime NBA reporter David Ramil. However you're tuning in on YouTube, Odyssey, or your favorite podcast app, thanks so much for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. We're recording this live on YouTube moments after the news broke. The Heat have acquired Terry Rozier in a trade with the Charlotte Hornets for Kyle Lowry and a 2027 first-round pick. That pick is going to be lottery protected in 2027 and unprotected in 2028, which has a lot to do with whatever else Miami can do between now and the deadline, or maybe even the summer. We'll get to all of that. We'll get into the end of the Kyle Lowry era, what we think is next for the Miami Heat, if we think that they are even done making moves between now and February 8th. But let's just start with the Terry Rozier piece of this. David, what do you think about Rozier's fit in Miami?
I think it provides something immediate that Miami desperately needs, which is applying rim pressure, the ability to score. A person who is going to, I think, maximize his time here in Miami. I'm looking at this not just from the on-court perspective, but also the intangibles that you can't really measure, because that's something that Miami sort of banks on. It's too, is that when players come here, they're going to try to be the best versions of themselves, or at least that's generally the case. And for Terry, considering his adoration of Dwayne Wade, I think it's going to mean something more to him just to be a part of this Miami Heat culture. So I think that's a big component that people probably aren't even considering, is how much he's going to come here and be like, this is it. This is what I looked up to, what I wanted to, when I was growing up, looking at Dwayne Wade and thinking of him as my favorite, or one of my favorite players of all time. Now I'm in a Heat uniform. So I think this is going to be a special moment for him. Aside from all that, the fact that he comes in here and provides a guy who's willing to take shots, who's going to be able to score from the perimeter, who can apply some rim pressure, who can make plays for others, who's a little quicker on defense, although he's not a great defender. I think he's going to be able to provide some of that energy that Miami desperately needs from a point of attack defense perspective. So I think it's going to be a really, really good fit for Miami and for Terry.
He's averaging 4.5 shots within the restricted area per game for Charlotte this season. He's finishing at nearly 58% on those shots. That is about 1 billion times more than what Kyle Lowry was doing at the point guard spot. Kyle Lowry was averaging basically 1 shot in the restricted area per game for Miami, not finishing at a high clip. That 4.5, to put that into better context here, is basically what Jimmy Butler does and what Bam Adebayo are able to do in terms of getting to the basket. Tyler Hero, even, who has tried to make more of an effort at getting to the basket, he's mostly like a floater range guy at that backcourt spot. Kyle Lowry's been moved to the bench. And Tyler Hero has basically assumed those point guard starting job over the last 2 games. But even him, he's getting to the basket. Again, restricted area, not floater range, not cute little mid-range shot, stuff like that. No, at the basket. He's getting at the basket about twice a game. So Rozier's doubling what Tyler Hero is providing at that position too. So you're basically adding another sort of, in terms of rim pressure, and that's what I mean by this, and that's all I mean by this, you're adding like another Jimmy Butler, another Bam Adebayo to Miami's offense. And we know how much Jimmy and Bam, not only how important it is when they're aggressive and how helpful that is to Miami's offense, but how important it is to creating shots for other people. How often do we see Jimmy Butler just get to the basket, kick out to a wide open shooter outside beyond the arc? All the time, right? That's basically what his function in the offense is. So now you have Terry Rozier at that point guard spot who's able to do that. And that's just not something that Kyle Lowry was doing at all, basically for the last 2 seasons, really about the last year and a half. He wasn't doing a whole lot of that anyway. Terry Rozier is averaging 23.2 points per game. He's also averaging 6.6 assists per game and only like a smidge over 2 turnovers per game. So his assist to turnover ratio is good. I think the playmaking part of his game is something that has not been appreciated over the last 2 years. I mean, his 6.6 assists this year, and I understand LaMelo's been hurt for a lot of the last couple of years, but his 6.6 assists this year is a career high. So he's making strides in that department. I think it's another reason why Miami was so keen on adding him. The Heat had started seriously considering Terry Rozier a few days ago, and you and I had both heard yesterday that they were really kind of exploring this option very seriously. And they spent basically all day yesterday talking about this. Hey, is Terry Rozier the move that we want to make right now? Is he a guy that helps us in the Eastern Conference in the short term? What do we feel about that long-term contract? Kyle Lowry's contract is expiring. Rozier's contract is for 2 more years after this one. How does that fit into our luxury tax and the cap flexibility and all that stuff? So you've got Andy Ellsberg doing the Excel spreadsheets in the front office and figuring out all that cap wizardry and all those things. And they ultimately came to the decision that Terry Rozier was worth moving that Lowry expiring contract, whatever asset that was the move that they were going to make, right? He was not a good player for Miami this year, but his contract was one that was movable. And this was the move. Right now, you don't have that expiring contract. So they said, okay, this is what we want to use that expiring contract asset on. And we are now willing to move a first-round pick along with it because they think that highly of Terry Rozier. I think we're going to get a much better defensive player in Terry Rozier than he was in Charlotte. This is a guy who helped the Boston Celtics get to the Eastern Conference Finals in 2018, That's young Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. He has a ton of playoff experience. His nickname was Scary Terry for a reason, but he wasn't that scary in Charlotte because the Hornets weren't that scary, right?
Right.
But the Miami Heat are scary. The Miami Heat are scary. They have been scary to Celtics fans, to Sixers fans, to Bucks fans over the last 3 years. And having Scary Terry now in Miami, I think it's a good fit, and you already outlined all the personality fits and the things like that. And I remember even talking with him on Wade and Wade night about being able to be there. And he was honored to be able to kind of get a chance to see his childhood hero honored by the hometown team in that way. So I like the fit a lot. I like the fit, honestly, more than the DeJounte Murray thing, given the cost, right? If you look at what it's going to cost DeJounte Murray, which is going to be like the equivalent of 2 first-round picks and a real player kind of asset back, I kind of like the idea of just going with Rozier here. It costs you a lottery protected first in 2027. It doesn't hamper you too much in terms of your flexibility. You move on from the Kyle Lowry experiment, or era, I should say, and you get a player who wants to be here, who I think is a good fit, who puts more pressure on the rim than DeJounte Murray. I know maybe it sounds like a hot take to people because Rozier in the vacuum is not as good as DeJounte Murray.
No, I agree. Yeah. I think I know exactly where you're going. Yeah, I think Murray is the better player. But considering how much more, I don't think it's that significant an improvement over what Terry Rozier is going to provide. And considering what Terry will provide in Miami, or at least the expectation of what he'll be able to do, I think he's a much better fit. I think it works out so much better for Miami. It's a much cheaper acquisition too. And I think it benefits the Heat in long term too. So I think we saw this kind of the writing on the wall for a number of days. We started hearing buzz maybe weeks ago, but it's been picking up over the last couple of days. So somebody asked in our comments right now, am I surprised that the move was made? Yes and no. I would say I was kind of 70-30 because of all the scuttle that we've been hearing about this possibility. So it seemed like they were definitely interested. I also thought that maybe the next week or two would pass and we'd hear, the deal has not been finalized, or it just hasn't materialized because neither party was able to give what the other party would want, or something to that effect. So I wouldn't have been surprised at that outcome. But, Miami needed to make a change. You kind of stated it already, and you've been talking about this over the last couple of weeks too. What Lowry was able to do in Miami wasn't much. He just wasn't contributing. And I won't go so far, and I know maybe we can save this for later on the show when we talk about what Lowry's stint was like in Miami.
Yes, I don't think the Lowry thing.
All right, fair enough.
All right, but the Terry Rozier part of this too. I mean, what does this do for Miami's offense? They're ranked 20th now in offensive rating. I mean, I think this is going to be a substantial boost. You know what? Let's get to the Lowry stuff. Let's get to the Lowry stuff here because it's a big deal. What does the Kyle Lowry era look like now in Miami? Now that we can look back on it, was it a success overall? What's next for Kyle Lowry? Was the end really that bad? We'll talk about all of that next here on Locked On Heat.
Today's episode is brought to you by Hungryroot. If you've been thinking about making changes to the way you eat, or you want to eat a little bit healthier, well, Hungryroot is the easiest way to get fresh, high-quality food delivered to your door. They've got healthy groceries and simple recipes all in one place. Look, you take a quiz on Hungryroot, and it'll get to know you, what your goals are, how you like to eat. They'll ask you what flavors you like, what kitchen appliances you use, and so much more. They recommend recipes and groceries based on your taste. So you take those suggestions or choose anything you want, and they've got the fresh produce, high-quality meat, seafood, pantry staples, whatever you're looking for, and they'll deliver it right to your door. The best part is Hungryroot follows a simple standard. It's got to taste good, it's got to be quick to make, and it's got to contain nothing but trusted ingredients. So spend less time meal planning, shopping, and cooking, and more time enjoying life with Hungryroot. Right now, Hungryroot is offering Locked On NBA listeners 40% off your first delivery and free veggies for life. Just go to hungryroot.com/lockedon. You get 40% off your first delivery and you get your free veggies. That's hungryroot.com/lockedon. Don't forget to use that link so they know that we sent you. Today's episode is also brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And for eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, and exclusions do apply.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube and in your favorite podcast app. So the Terry Rozier part of it, you and I had heard that this was kind of in the works, that the Heat were seriously considering it. I had heard something last night that this could be done today. I was at the Heat Gala last night talking to Rick Ross.
Was he at the Gala?
Other players.
Was Kyle Lowry there?
He was. Kyle Lowry was there. He did show up. Everybody was there. Jimmy Butler showed up late, fashionably late. So did Kyle Lowry. But so did Bam Adebayo and Tyler Hero. Tyler Hero took his sweet time showing up to that gala last night. But, you got to look the part, man. First guy there was Jamal Cain and then Cole Swider. So you send the two-way guys there early to start filling seats. Anyway, I'm mixing and mingling. I'm talking to some people, and I had heard something that this could be done today. So it was kind of on my radar when I woke up this morning. And then we got the news breaking from Shams and Woj, as it does when the deal is actually for real done. You got the agents leaking it directly to the Woj and Shams Incorporated. So that's what happened. Yep. I think it's a good move. You wanted to talk about Kyle Lowry. I cut you off before we went to the commercial break, though.
No, there's a lot to break down there because I think he just hasn't been producing at all. Like, I don't think it was ever quite as bad as Heat fans saw it. Like, even last game, I was watching that loss to the Magic, and in the first half, Kyle was making plays. Like, what he does might be subtle, and it's not nearly enough to satisfy Heat fans, but he was still decent. Not good, maybe, and definitely not productive, which is something that Miami needed him to be, but he was decent. And it just felt like Miami fans turned on him very, very quickly throughout this whole process. He signed a deal. And again, a point I've made before, he was the big name acquisition when the team signed him a few years ago. The addition of him and PJ Tucker was supposed to put Miami over the top into contending status. And it worked for the most part because they were one shot away from the NBA Finals. A number one seed, a very realistic chance at knocking off those Warriors that was not the high-level Warriors that created that dynasty years ago. Then they were in the finals against a very good Denver Nuggets team and the MVP and Nikola Jokic. So it wasn't, they got what they wanted to out of this stint with Kyle Lowry to some extent, but he just wasn't as productive as he could have been as an individual player. And the salary and everything else, I think, was really difficult for Heat fans to swallow. And as I've said before, also, Lowry has done himself absolutely no favors by being cantankerous, by being aloof, by not being congenial with either fans or media. And he's been like that through all of his career. But you kind of took that with a grain of salt because I think it wasn't quite as bad in Toronto.
It wasn't.
was just like, oh, that's Kyle being Kyle. Like, you could still talk to Kyle. I talked to Kyle when he was in Toronto. You could still talk to Kyle. Now in a Heat uniform, and in a Heat uniform, he's like, Nope. I didn't come here to do media. I came here to win.
Well, he had a
And
specific rule in place that he doesn't. He did not do one-on-ones with the media, and this is not even a media gripe, but this is the way that you kind of, Kyle Lowry doesn't have a He's maybe a future Hall of Famer. I don't know. He's one of the greatest players in Toronto Raptors franchise history, but doesn't have like a huge platform. He's not on Michelob Ultra commercials and stuff like that Jimmy Butler has, right? He kind of needs the media as that olive branch. He's not big on social media, and that's his own choice. But he never really worked with the media to kind of become part of, and he also never really fully bought in on Miami Heat culture. I agree. And the way I always put it too is he never bowed at the altar of Heat culture, the way that a lot of players kind of come in and bow at the altar. And quite frankly, the way I think the Heat organization expects them to embrace Heat culture. I don't know that he ever fully did that. He never got into the same kind of game shape. He was treated a little bit different, like kind of on that same level as Jimmy Butler when he was here. Even though he wasn't producing at the same level of Jimmy Butler, obviously. And so, I don't know. Look.
It kind of reminds me a little bit of Ray Allen. Ray Allen's stint here. Yeah, because he was like, I've already accomplished. I've already won a title. I'm coming here to win again, but I've already established my career. I'm an established veteran. I've made my money. I've made my legacy.
He was coming off the bench right away, and Kyle Lowry was a starter. And I think there's different expectations that come along with being a starter like Kyle Lowry. And look, the first year was fine. I think half of his second year was fine. And I think if you really asked the Heat, what did you expect out of a 37-year-old Kyle Lowry, even making nearly $30 million this year? They'd say, we probably expected something like this. He's a 6-foot point guard at 37 years old. It's kind of a miracle he's even in the league right now, let alone playing for a contending team in the Eastern Conference. Now, that said, his production has really dipped. There are things that you like that Kyle Lowry brings, but he's just not a starting level point guard anymore. But he thinks he's a starting level point guard. And he made those comments at training camp that he expected to start. I do think it created a situation in Miami that became untenable to the point where they had to trade him, not just because of the lack of production. If he was just going to buy into a backup point guard role, and by the way, I don't necessarily blame him for what it's worth. There's no Gabe Vincent here anymore. He was fine with it towards the end of last year when there was Gabe Vincent clearly outplaying him. There was no Gabe Vincent this year. Drew Smith ain't that guy. Josh Richardson's not even a real point guard. They didn't have that guy. So I don't really blame him, but it did create an untenable situation. And it's why yesterday we got on the show and said, you and I, these are things that we had picked up on and said, a trade can't wait. We can't wait until February 8th to make a deal. It has to happen ASAP. Right. And what happened? It happened ASAP. And we had that show for a reason, is because we sensed something like this could be happening. And again, even last night I was hearing it could be tomorrow, and it happened today. So here we go.
We were debating whether or not to publish that this morning. I'm glad we published it right away, because that episode would not have lasted for very long. But I think there was just tension there too, like Bam's comments, and we've heard a lot, even the demotion last year, and there was a lot of pseudo reporting that he was done in Miami as early as last season. And I think it just was clear, to your point, that he just wasn't quite the fit he was supposed to be from a personality standpoint. He wasn't just going to be like, oh, you tell me what to do and I'll jump through hoops in order to get it done, because he's Kyle freaking Lowry and he's done a lot. Yep. He didn't need to go through that process. So I totally get it from both sides, but I think there was also just a tension there, and without the on-court play to back up that tension, it's like, we don't need you on the court or off the court. And if that's the case, better to move on and get somebody who's going to be able to contribute.
They kind of expected, when they made this deal in the first place, hey, this guy's going to be a $30 million expiring salary in this season. This is somebody that we could potentially move. I don't think, like, in a structural way, it was all that surprising. But I do think that the emotional, sort of interpersonal aspect behind the scenes was a little bit surprising, to your point, David. So another comparison between Terry Rozier and Kyle Lowry. Kyle Lowry, as a starting point guard, was last in the league in points per game at 8.2. Last in the league at field goal attempts per game among starting point guards at 6.5. I'm sorry. Last in the league in assists per game among starting point guards at 4. He is not a starting point guard anymore. He might be able to help some team on a buyout or something. We'll see what happens with Charlotte off the bench. Yeah. I think he could be a helpful vet in another locker room. I have, whatever. But in terms of starting point guard, that's it. Now, Terry Rozier, you go from 8.2 points per game from Kyle Lowry to 23.2 points per game with Terry Rozier. 4 assists per game from Kyle Lowry to 6.6 per game with Terry Rozier. 6.5 field goal attempts per game from Kyle Lowry to 18.3 with Terry Rozier. Now, obviously, those shot attempts and those points might come down now that he's playing with Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo, and Tyler Hero, but that's what you're getting. That's the kind of player you're getting, and that's what he's capable of. If Kyle Lowry played for the Charlotte Hornets, he's not putting up 23 points per game. So you're getting a very capable, score,
Right.
who can get to the basket and create shots for others. And I think it could be enough. When I talk about like problem solving, David, you kind of got to look at what's the one thing that we can do here that solves like maybe 1, 2, 3 other issues somewhere else. And I think by getting Terry Rozier in, you're solving like that awkward locker room issue. You're getting production from that point guard spot. You're finding ways to pressure the rim, get to the foul line more, which is going to be Miami's most efficient version of shot making this year, if not the 3-point shooting, which Rozier is going to help with also. So I think this could even have, as good as Rozier is, and you and I like his game and have for a while, I think his addition can even have a domino effect that helps Miami's offense, which is currently ranked 20th in offensive rating. I think this could be enough, not to go to elite, but if you can get the league average on offense and you can get some help defensively, which we'll talk about here in a second, I think this is the kind of move that could be a big one for Miami. And I think it's basically what this is what the front office concluded in making this move. They think it's a move that could make a difference, could move the needle for them in the East.
Good. I hope, I'm also going to say I'm tired of hearing, oh, they never make a move. They never make a move. They made the move. Let's accept that. Let's move on.
Yeah.
But having said that, I'm actually kind of getting psyched. And this is not a knock on Kyle, because I've written about Kyle. We talked to Kyle, obviously. I've been a fan of what Kyle was expected to bring and what he could bring at this stage in his career. And he deserved better because he's an all-time great and a Hall of Famer, et cetera. But I'm kind of excited about this. I think he's going to be such a good fit here for what Miami does. Like, I'm thinking about what the starting lineup's going to be, right? And I imagine he's going to probably start in place of Caleb Martin, or do you start Caleb alongside Jimmy, Scary Terry, Tyler Hero, and Bam Adebayo, and then move Nikola back to the bench? That's an option now. That's a quick, fast, potent lineup offensively. Defensively, they're a little undersized, though, so that's a problem. It's not like Nikola Jovic is a rim protector, but at least at 6'10", 6'11", he adds some size to that rotation. But in terms of what Terry is going to provide, just the ability to drive and kick, I'm looking at him breaking down a perimeter defender, getting into the painted area, pulling up for a jumper, making a nice pass or a cutter, off-ball movement from Tyler Hero, Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo. There are possibilities there. Scary Terry can toss the lob to Bam. That might be a good pick-and-roll combination to watch out for. It's going to be really interesting. I really like the fit. I'm jazzed up, man. I really am. Not just as a fan of basketball, but as somebody who covers this team, it's going to add an element that I think the Heat have lacked over the last couple of years. It's going to be a little bit more dynamic, and I think it's going to be a really, really good fit for the Heat. Again, I agree with you, not to get to the point where they're going to be an elite offense, but damn, they couldn't have gotten much worse, dude. That was really bleachable offense. Like, you could just erase that from your vision forever. That would be perfect. But, sometimes the offense has been really, really bad. It's not going to be elite. It's not going to be, the 2016 Golden State Warriors, but it's going to be much better than it was. And I'm excited about the possibility.
Terry Rozier is shooting 46% on dribble handoff shots too. So maybe add that to the offense as well. You mentioned the starting lineup and some of the changes there. We'll get to that. We'll also get to what's next for the Heat, because we still have a little bit less than 3 weeks between now and the trade deadline. And there's some other moves that could be made here. We'll talk about that next year on Locked On Heat.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL postseason is wrapping up, but there's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150. Whether you win or lose, the app is easy to use. You can find live same-game parlays. You can find bets under the new Explore tab. You can make a parlay in the Parlay Hub, and there's so much more. But you'll only find it if you go visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet a layup. FanDuel, the official partner of the NFL.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube and on your favorite podcast app. Every day, or make sure you tune in Wednesday night for our recap of the game against the Memphis Grizzlies. Well, Terry Rozier playing that game. I'm assuming we'll get some more information on that after Heat practice this afternoon. Hopefully he's available, man. I can't wait to see this guy and kind of get – this team just needed a change. It needed some juice. We've talked about how Kevin Love provided that last year. I think Terry Rozier is going to provide that this year. I think something in that locker room needed to shake up. And I hate making Kyle Lowry the sort of the pinata on all this, because he's not.
Exactly.
But I don't think he was helping himself, and he wasn't helping the Heat. And look, whatever, man. I'm not. This is the NBA. You get traded. That's just what you sign up for if you're playing in the NBA. And it's not the first time Kyle Lowry got traded, and he'll probably not be playing for the Hornets for very long either. So I'm not going to get too in my feelings about it. But the Heat needed to make this move, and it was a good move. And I think it was the right calculus that they made here. And I'm excited that they just went for it. That they stopped hoarding all these first round picks. They stopped worrying about this. And by the way,
flexibility, etc.
Well, they still do have some flexibility. The interesting thing about this, so they can still this summer, after draft night, they are still going to be able to trade 2 first-round picks if they wanted to, with the protections the way that they were able to do this. So it's a 2027 first-round pick, lottery protected in 2027, unprotected in 2028. So those protections, if it doesn't convey in 2027, immediately come off, and that pick is moved in 2028. What that does is it frees up the 2030 first-round pick to still get traded. So Miami could still trade a 2030 first-round pick now or this summer. And on trade night, they could move the 2024 first-round pick. So in essence, they would do that thing that teams do where you make the pick for another team and then trade that player. So you could basically still have 2 first-round picks if you wanted to make a move over the summer. And that's very important. Plus, whatever number of pick swaps that they're going to have available, which will be several. And you have these other assets, whether it's Tyler Hero, Terry Rozier, Nikola Jovic, Jaime, whatever it's going to be. You have this other stuff. Not that I think they're trading Jaime. Don't come after me. But
2 points to make real quick. I'm glad you brought up how his tenure in Boston, because I think a lot of people have forgotten it because he's been with Charlotte for so long. And you kind of just overlooked the fact that, he was putting up these big numbers on a really bad team, but that's not through any fault of his. But he was actually a really solid contributor in Boston. Yes, he had his ups and downs, but he was part of that young and up-and-coming Boston Celtics team that was surprising the hell of a lot of people, along with, say, Jay Crowder, Kelly Olynyk,
He was the key part of the Kemba Walker deal, which was supposed to be a good trade it didn't work out for the Boston Celtics. Kemba Walker was like an all-star, and he was the key part of that deal.
Right. And so the Hornets, through injury, through the mistake of drafting LaMelo Ball, et cetera, I mean, that has just been a very bad situation. So I think with the added stakes, I keep saying this, the intangibles aspect, which is so hard to quantify and measure, but I think the idea of him just playing for something more than just rolling the ball out and cashing your checks and playing 82 games and then just going home to Cancun at the end of April or whatever, it's like, I think it's going to mean something to him. And so I'm excited to see what the possibilities of that added intensity is going to do for his game and his opportunity to contribute for Miami. And then also along the same lines of maintaining flexibility, Miami has flexibility to make more moves this season. And one of those is the fact that they get under the second apron. Now they can be active in the buyout market, which Miami has always thrived in historically. So this gives them another opportunity to add somebody in a month, 2 months. Who knows? I mean, Kevin Love was added mid to late February of last year, if I'm not mistaken, right after the All-Star break, and he wound up being a really big contributor to the Heat. So within a month or so, Miami could, at the very least, make an addition through the buyout market. But I think they're still going to make another trade. I think.
Quick note on the buyout thing. Quick note on the buyout thing. So because of some of the new tax rules, and I won't bore people with the details on that, but essentially what it boils down to. So Miami has now opened up a $5 million tax player mid-level exception. So they have the mid-level exception that they can actually use in free agency this year in making this move, because now where they are relative to the luxury tax, that means that they could sign somebody into that room via buyout, to your point, David, or just a current free agent, which I don't think that free agent is out there. So if somebody gets bought out that's worth their while, they could go that way. Yeah. That player can't have been making more than $12.4 million on their current salary. So for instance, if Gordon Hayward gets bought out, that's not an option. Right. But if that player that gets bought out is making less than $12.4 million, and why it's that number, I don't know. Just the new weird cap rules in the CBA. Just take my word for it. That's what it is. They have to make less than $12.4 million in order to be. But there's a lot of guys that could be, there. Like I look at a guy like DeLon Wright, for instance, in Washington. Just throwing out a name. I don't want to do like a whole buyout thing, but that would be the sort of player that we're kind of talking about here. One last thing on Terry Rozier. Almost like a 6'9" wingspan. Just saying that for defensively, he adds some length there at the point of attack. I think it'll be good. I think he can. We see him kind of fight over screens, and man, I've seen this all the time. You put a player under Eric Spoelstra, that player gets 15 to 20% better defensively right away, and that's without all the coaching and all that stuff that takes place. So I'm very excited for the move. I think it's a good move and that flexibility. Let's talk about what happens between now and the rest of the February 8th trade deadline, because I do not think that the Heat are necessarily done. I think that they can
I
make
don't
other
either.
moves. I think Caleb Martin could be in play. I think they can explore
Yes.
what they're going to look for him. I also think now, and maybe this is not a now between the deadline thing, but now that you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-ish contracts at $20 million or more, Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo, Tyler Hero, Duncan Robinson, and Terry Rozier, you need to start thinking about which one of those guys are the most essential. Because I don't know that this team is going to be able to afford all 5 of those guys, plus filling out the other 10 spots on the roster, or 9 spots if they're only going to keep 14 next year. Again, maybe not a problem that they have to deal with between now and February 8th, but at least something that they have to be, it has to be at the very least in the back of their mind. So there's that just sort of lingering. There's that question looming for future Miami Heat purposes. But I don't think that they're not. But what this also means is that Caleb Martin's days in Miami are probably done, David.
Yes,
I think
I
we're
agree.
there because they're just not going to be able to afford what he's going to want as a free agent. It was sort of the idea here is, do we let Kyle Lowry's contract expire and re-sign Caleb Martin, or do you use Lowry's expiring contract to get a long-term salary back, and then that would probably cost us the opportunity to re-sign Caleb Martin again because of where we are in regards to the luxury tax. So if Caleb Martin's days in Miami are over, I think it makes a lot of sense for them to seriously explore what it is that they can get for him on the trade deadline before the trade deadline, as opposed to letting him walk for nothing.
Yeah, I agree. Just to address this real quick, because a lot of people keep kind of writing about it. I don't see Tyler Hero getting moved. Like we're talking
Yeah,
about
no, I know.
ranking
We don't
those.
have to do that now. I know everybody wants to dog Tyler Hero. We don't have to. I brought that up. Like, we don't have to do that. Let's talk about what's next for Caleb.
What is next for Caleb? I don't know. At this point now, I wonder if he is as expendable. I think you want to make an additional move to try and acquire either a backup point guard or some additional size in the front court there. But I just don't know that Caleb is going to get you that. And I don't know. We talked about this and we debated this in yesterday's episode, like what the perceived value might be for Caleb Martin as an impending free agent, and considering he's dealt with injuries and might be struggling. Like, I'm a little surprised that he wasn't included in the Charlotte deal. And that's not to say that he wouldn't be, because, Charlotte is still open to trading some of their roster players. And there's a connection between the Heat and Charlotte, and for obvious reasons.
Sure.
So I think they could explore that possibility, and he just wanted to, maybe they just wanted to jettison Lowry ASAP and then see, maybe kind of kick the tires down the road and see, do you want a Caleb reunion in Charlotte? I could see that being the case. That's where I kind of see it. I don't know. I'd put it at 50-50 in terms of Caleb being able to play out the rest of the season.
It's a good, like, you don't have to trade Caleb, like, depending on what you're going to get back for him. If all you're going to get back is like a 2nd-round pick or something, it probably just makes more sense to hold on to him. Right? Because he can at least help you. If the goal is to maximize your window right now, which obviously it is, that's why you're making this trade with using a future 1st-round pick to get Terry Rozier in your doors now, then the priority is the short term. So you don't want to sacrifice any of your short-term viability just because you might lose Caleb for nothing. So I think that you need to make some calculus. But if you can get for Caleb Martin somebody who is on a rookie scale contract, who is under team control for at least one more year, around like $5 million. I'm just going to spitball a number, $5 to $6 million, right around what Caleb's making this year. Then I think you have to at least think about what that trade looks like if you're Miami, what kind of player you're bringing back. I brought this up a couple weeks ago, but like a Davion Mitchell. That's a name that makes sense to me, right? Even having added Terry Rozier, you can still add more depth in that backcourt, because you do have a lot of depth on the wing with Haywood and Jaime Jaquez there, and even Josh Richardson to a certain degree. Do you go get more of like a true guard? You could trade Caleb Martin to Sacramento, and I don't know that Sacramento would be interested in this. There's no reporting behind this. It's just like a spitball idea to get a guy who's young, who hasn't really worked out on his team right now, and Davion Mitchell, who makes sense in terms of balancing your roster. Like, that to me is the kind of deal. Or again, I brought this up yesterday, but I texted Nick Angstadt, host of Locked On Mavs. What would the Mavs say if the Heat called him up and offered Caleb Martin for Dante Exum? He said, I think they would do it, because it kind of rebalances both of those rosters. They have too many guards. We have too many wings. Kind of just help each other out that way. I think like a deal like that could be helpful. I don't know that it necessarily moves the needle, but it could be helpful. And you can get a player under team control for next year that helps you kind of flesh out the rest of your roster and like looking forward in terms of your cap sheet is a little bit more team friendly. So these are the kinds of things. It's not going to be, maybe it would be, I don't know, but I don't think it'll be some sort of huge landmark like a Terry Rozier type of real needle mover trade, but it could be something that just makes sense.
Yeah, you're trying to shore up perceived weak spots in the roster and create that sort of balance that you were hinting at, not just in terms of positionally, but you're lacking something in the backcourt. You didn't have a defender. You don't have a defender now. You didn't have a scorer. At least you addressed that with the acquisition of Rozier. The next step, at least to me, is get a backcourt defender, because Josh Richardson has proven that he cannot be that. And that Tyler Hero, as good as he has been and as much as he's improved as a defender, might still be a problem in the postseason. That's a whole other issue to address. I think the next step for Miami is probably to try and find some size, because Miami just winds up looking completely overmatched in that regard. I don't know if there's another option out there, and I don't know that Caleb and or the combination of Nico is enough to get a legitimate center option, but it's something that I think Miami is still going to have to explore. I get the
center
sense
or power
too,
forward.
Yes, yeah. I don't think that they're done. I think if they're willing to make this move now, to me, what it says is like, we recognize that we need something more, and we do want to capitalize on this opportunity.
Exactly.
I said this yesterday, like the Barry Jackson of Miami Herald saying, oh, they've never really been too concerned about the closing window for Jimmy Butler. It's like, well, why the hell not? Because it is closing and he is getting older. I'm glad that the Heat front office said, you know what, we need something, and let's get something while we can out of this Lowry deal and acquire a player that can provide scoring and all the other things that we've laid out over the course of this episode, and just fills an obvious need. So I'm excited to see what that brings. I'm also excited and looking forward to what Miami does next, because I think they're not done yet.
Well, we're already going long, but we have a lot of people tuning in live, submitting questions. So are you down to just kind of answer some of these questions? Let's go bonus overtime here for a Terry Rozier breaking news podcast.
Listening in about Terry Rozier. Who knew? Who knew that Terry Rozier was that popular?
West heads are showing up. The David heads are showing up. All the Locked On Heat everydayers are showing up. I love this in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon. You mentioned
does nobody work 9 to 5 anymore?
Not when Terry Rozier got traded to the Heat. Everything stops. Everything stops. We talked a little bit about this, and I want to get to it before we get to some of these other names and moves that could be made now between now and the deadline. But Enzo writes in, what's the optimal starting lineup right now? I think it's a very interesting question. Let's just say Terry Rozier's here. Everybody's healthy. And I'm gonna throw Jaime Jaquez Jr. into that mix too. Let's just assume that when he's healthy, gets back from this groin strain, everybody's healthy. Optimal starting lineup. I think you start Terry Rozier because of that rim pressure. I think you have him. I think Tyler Hero is still the starter. I don't think you move him to the bench. And like you said, I know that some Heat fans have an issue with Tyler Hero. That's always going to be a case and whatever. But Tyler Hero is starting. I don't know what else to tell you at this point. Like, there's been enough evidence here that Tyler Hero is a full-time starter as long as he's a member of the Miami Heat. It's just happening. So you've got Terry Rozier and you got Tyler Hero starting in your backcourt, which I quite like. I don't think it's as bad as defensively as maybe the reputation is. It's not great defensively, but it's not going to be as bad. It's not as small as people think. Tyler Hero is bigger than people believe. He's 6'5". Tyler Hero's a big guy. His wingspan's a negative, but he's tall. Terry Rozier's wingspan of almost 6'9". That's a good wingspan. So I think they could do some things. Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo. Who's the 4? Who needs to start at forward there with that group? At power forward.
To me, it's Haywood Highsmith. I think that's the obvious choice. As much as
I like it.
I like the possibility of Martin, but obviously I like the potential of Jovic and what he can bring. I know, and now he'll have a backcourt partner in which to push the pace a little bit more. But I think if you're looking for balance and you're looking for the right, combination of players, a guy who doesn't need the ball and who's another outlet option in terms of, let's say, Tyler drives to the rim, and then you've got a cutting Terry Rozier playing off ball, and then he gets defended well. He's looking for an opportunity to kick the ball out to the perimeter. And you've got Haywood Highsmith, who's good from the elbow. He's good from the corners. He can pop that shot. He looks like he's comfortable and getting better in terms of being able to be a reliable three-point shooter. And he brings defense at a high level. Again, you're going to be undersized unless you make a trade. So to me, why not at least get a high level, if not elite level defender in there, a guy who doesn't need the ball very much and who won't grumble about minutes or opportunity or anything like that, because he's just happy to be out on the floor for now.
It's a great point. The fact that he doesn't need the ball, because Rozier needs the ball. Hero needs the ball. Jimmy needs the ball. Bam needs the ball. I think the shine on Jovic has worn a little bit since he started 10 games in a row. I still like him as a long-term prospect. I just don't know that he's been that helpful in terms of being a starter. He hasn't been hurt. He hasn't been bad. I just don't know that, whatever. I don't know why I keep apologizing for this, but it's fine. But the other part about trading Kyle Lowry and putting a offensive threat in that starting lineup is now you can afford to start Haywood Highsmith, who's not really a threat with the ball in his hands. Like you said, the most threatening he is from the corners. Nobody guards him above the break. Nobody, like, you're only guarding him and only kind of from the corners, but he can make that shot. It's very PJ Tucker-esque. Nobody guarded PJ Tucker, even though he's making the shot at like a 50% clip from the corner. Nobody guarded him. Haywood Highsmith can at least provide that, plus the defensive stuff that you mentioned is really why he's in there. So I think that that's the starting five. I think you nailed it. I think that's it. Because now that you don't have Lowry, you can afford to start Haywood Highsmith. Because instead of having two non-factors on offense in that starting group with Lowry and Highsmith, you only have one. And you can afford one. In fact, from a fit perspective, it might be best to have one because those other four guys need the ball, to your point. So I think you nailed it. I think that's your starting five. And that brings, assuming Jaime's healthy, when he gets healthy, Jaime off the bench, Duncan Robinson off the bench. I think Kevin Love is still your backup center. And I think that's your top 8. Oh, and Caleb Martin. That's your top 9. That's your top 9. And then you see where Josh Richardson fits in. You see where Nikola Jovic fits in. You kind of see if there's a Thomas Bryant and Orlando Robinson matchup, etc. But I like Love, Caleb, Jaime, and Duncan off the bench as your top 9.
Yeah, no, I could see that. I think you kind of stagger the minutes a little bit. Maybe take Tyler and Bam out early, bring Kevin Love and Duncan into that mix, and then let Tyler cook lineups with him and Caleb Martin on the wing, and you get Bam back in there as well. Those could be that kind of balance across the roster that you're looking for. So there's a lot of different options there too. And again, we're forgetting Jaime Hawkins, who has been such a spark too. He can play with virtually any lineup. So I don't think there's been I wouldn't say that there's he could start and he's come off the bench and he's had the same level of impact in both cases. So I'm not concerned about his role or fit on either one of those lineups.
Isaac writes in, if this is the only trade that the Heat do for this season, would that be enough, in your opinion, for the team? What?
Enough for what?
I don't know. Enough for you. Enough in your opinion.
And that's.
Would you be disappointed?
Have to quantify that.
Let's not play the results here. If they just make the Terry Rozier move and they keep the rest of the team the way it is between now and the deadline, would you be disappointed?
No.
I'll reframe the question. I would not either.
Yeah, I think they would be having made an attempt to improve this roster and recognizing that's a level of self-awareness that I think a lot of people question about the Miami front office and poorly in doing so, because obviously this front office has been very, very good and been one of the best for decades. So they've earned the benefit of the doubt. Having said that, it's also not easy to pull the trigger on these kinds of things, because I think there is a sense of loyalty to players. As much as you want to make moves to improve your roster, like you signed in Kyle, and I don't think it was bluster. I don't think it was hyperbole. I don't think that, when Eric Spoelstra talked about QB1 and about the impact of Kyle and the moments he had in the postseason over the last couple of seasons, I think there was genuine respect there. So it's not easy to make these moves, but they recognized, look, we can't do this anymore. It's just not working, and we've got to try to do something better and bigger. And so to make that move, I'm very proud of the front office for making that kind of acquisition and recognizing we need to do something different. I just don't, these moves are also difficult to make. Like we talk about this all the time. Like, guys go on the armchair general manager and, enter some names and numbers. And it's like, oh, I could pull this trade off easily. That's not how it works. It takes.
Is it a little disappointing given that this could have been Damian Lillard or Drew Holiday?
I mean, sure, I guess. But that you can go down the road on so many different, acquisitions like that, either free agency or the draft. It's like, oh, they should never have taken Michael Beasley in 2008. They should have just taken Kevin Love then, and they would have had their front court. They could have had Russell Westbrook playing alongside Dwayne Wade.
I mean, Hero would have been involved in a Dame trade or Drew Holiday trade. So you keep Tyler Hero in this, and you get a good starting point guard in Terry Rozier, who's maybe like among the top 100 players in the NBA. He's probably between 90 and 100. Terry Rozier.
Yep.
But that's better than where they were with Kyle Lowry. It is.
Yep.
Kyle Lowry wasn't a top 100 player in the NBA anymore.
I think
so.
To say enough, to kind of look at it from the original question, like, yes, again, it's going to take a lot. You're getting a boost from Rozier, you still have to wait and see what Tyler can do in the playoff and see whether these three players can maximize their respective games at a time when it matters most. And I think bigger question of all, can Jimmy Butler be Jimmy Butler? If those factors all align the way that they did last season and the year before that and 2 seasons before that, then yeah, I mean,
And Rozier's a guy who can help with the scoring burden in the regular season. The point that I made yesterday was that the Miami Heat the Miami Heat have a postseason superstar. They don't have a regular season superstar. Terry Rozier is not a regular season superstar. I'm not saying that, but he can at least put 20 points per game up, right? And they just needed one other guy who could just explode for 25 points on any given night, 30 points on any given night. They just didn't have enough of those guys because Jimmy Butler really isn't that guy, but for once every week and a half or so. Let's get to a few more questions here. Will the Heat make another move before the deadline? You and I think that they're going to seriously explore it. It's hard to know whether, like you were talking about before, it's hard to predict these things. There's a lot of work that goes into making these deals, but I think that they're going to aggressively explore that, and that's part of the reason that they made a trade now as opposed to waiting till February. The other reason was that the Kyle Lowry thing was just untenable. They had to get out of that situation, and that Terry Rozier is a good player who they like. But yeah, I think we can safely say here, and this isn't guessing, the Heat are going to aggressively look at other moves that can help this team between now and the trade deadline. What does that move look like? How about this? Duncan Caleb and a second for Dorian Finney-Smith and Royce O'Neal.
I don't think that solves the situation. Like, I mean, as good as Dorian Finney-Smith is shooting from the perimeter, I just don't think he's going to provide the same thing that Duncan does as a viable shooter and guy who can create off ball.
You're comparing Finney-Smith to one of the best shooters in the league, though.
Yeah, but I mean, Doe's having a great year. He's shooting really well. I just think that that's all fine, but I think that also creates a glut positionally too. Like, you're going to have these defensive-minded wings too. You're basically trading Caleb for Royce O'Neal, and that's kind of like an even swap. But you're also giving up on, to your point, a really good 3-point shooter and another guy who's is having a good 3-point shooting year. And I think that's basically where it is. I mean, I like the idea of Dorian Finney-Smith in Miami. I just don't know if I'd be willing to trade Duncan Robinson for him too, though, if that makes any sense.
So Finney-Smith is a career 36% 3-point shooter. He's shooting 38.6% from 3-point range this season. Overall, he's shooting 43% from the corners, which is borderline elite. Not quite elite, but borderline elite. I love Dorian Finney-Smith. If I'm the Miami Heat, that's my target. That's the guy I'm looking at.
Really?
It is. I think he's a good player on a very good contract. Starting at power forward, 6'7" with a near 7-foot wingspan. If you want to talk about what Haywood Highsmith gives you, like, Haywood Highsmith's evolved form is Dorian Finney-Smith. If Haywood Highsmith is Charmander, Dorian Finney-Smith is Charizard. Okay, I know you don't understand that reference, but some people on YouTube do. Like, that to me is a Heat type player that makes sense, who's under contract for another year, under team control, $13 to $14 million a year. I would really hesitate to move Duncan Robinson in a deal for Dorian Finney-Smith. The Royce O'Neal thing to me versus Caleb Martin is like you said, I don't care. But if I could find a way to build Caleb Martin and some other salaries to get to a Dorian Finney-Smith or something, I don't know what the trade looks like, but that's a guy who makes a lot of sense to me in terms of a Miami Heat fit. And it's a name that I think the Heat should seriously explore. The Nets are reportedly looking for 2 first-round picks for Dorian Finney-Smith when pigs fly. That's not going to happen. But I don't know. Does it cost you Nikola Jovic? If it does, is that the kind of move that you'd be willing to make? I don't know. I think the Heat I think there's certain parts of the Heat's front office that are very high on Nikola Jovic. I don't know that they'd be willing to move him for Dorian Finney-Smith. But if the goal is to make win now moves, there's no doubt that Finney-Smith helps you more right now than Jovic does. So I don't know. Yeah. I think it's an interesting name. It's a name I really like. It doesn't mean that that's going to happen. Kyle writes in, what would it take to get somebody like Jeremy Grant? All the reporting out of Portland right now, and I've heard the same thing, is that they're actually really happy with Jeremy Grant. They're not looking to move him, and that Jeremy Grant's really happy just putting up points and living in Portland for a while and cashing in. So I don't know that Jeremy Grant's really a name.
It's not a bad place to live. I wouldn't mind, getting a big paycheck just to live in Portland for a little bit. I mean, the cold's been brutal there, but aside from that, it's not a bad way to live. So he's happy. He's fine.
Is Larry Markkinen a possibility? No. No, not with one available first-round pick, at least. If the Jazz were seriously going to field offers for Larry Markkinen, they could probably get 3 first-round picks for him at this point.
And I don't think they are. Like they're playing really
They're
well.
not.
Like I
Right.
don't
Why
see,
would they?
yeah. Yeah,
No.
I think they're going to try and compete for a playoff spot. I mean, they've been better than the Lakers, who are like active in every possible trade scenario. And so I think there's no reason to trade a young all-star who seems to be flourishing there, unless you're going to get a truckload of players and picks. And Miami just doesn't have either of those to offer.
Maybe not Charizard for Dorian Finney-Smith, but maybe more of a Charmeleon.
You're stuck on this. You're stuck on this.
Somebody in the comments was like, "Did you really say Charizard?" Yeah, I said Charizard, but maybe more of a Charmeleon. How about Kelly Olynyk talking about the Utah Jazz? That's a name that I really like. If you look at the names, because all the things you just said about the Jazz are absolutely true. Like, I don't know why they would make a move. That team looks really good. Even like a name like Colin Sexton, who I think the
Yes.
Heat have liked in the past, and I think Heat fans like, like I love Colin Sexton. I'm a big Colin Sexton fan. I don't know why they would trade him. They started making this run when they put him in the starting lineup. Keep him. They're not trading Colin Sexton. So, but like a Talen Horton-Tucker, a Jordan Clarkson, a Kelly Olynyk, like these are some of those fringe role players that I could see them moving for the right price. I would welcome Kelly Olynyk back to Miami. I think that's a player that could help. Obviously, I don't need to sell Heat fans on the Kelly Olynyk vision. They've watched him up close and in person, but can shoot threes, handle the ball, not a great rebounder, defensively leaves a lot of meat on the bone, but could be helpful for this team. What does it cost? His contract at about $12 million. It's really tough to get to. So that's why I would say it's probably not going to happen, because I just don't see a way that the Heat can match that salary without sending Duncan Robinson out. And I don't think that you move Duncan Robinson for Kelly Olynyk.
No, I don't either. I don't know. There's got to be another young level player, a guy or a veteran, a minimum making veteran. I could be in that wheelhouse, but those guys generally aren't needle movers either. I don't know. I'm trying to think about the possibilities there, and we're ranking Duncan Robinson, I think, is where the front office has him too. Like, he's a very good player at this point. Like 2 years ago, that was a very different conversation. But right now, considering what he's brought to the table in the postseason, the maturity he's shown, the adaptation and versatility to his game that he's added, I think that makes him much more of a functional player. He's not untouchable. I mean, despite what we kind of talked about with Jake Fisher a couple of weeks ago, or last week rather, I don't think he's really untouchable. I just think you'd have to move him for a very, high quality player that can at least alleviate the loss of some of that 3-point shooting.
Ideal trade target, in your opinion? This is kind of what we're talking about here. I don't know that there's going to be another big move unless the Heat do decide to maybe move one of these bigger contracts. I don't know who's available. Like, let's say they even put Duncan Robinson up on the trade block. Like, what are you getting back for him that's at that salary range, right? We're looking at the names that are out there in that range. It's D'Angelo Russell. You're not doing that, right? Not doing that. Like, I don't know. Does the Chicago Bulls continue to fall in the standings? Do they make a guy like Nikola Vucevic available? I don't know. Maybe. Is that really the move for Miami? I like Vucevic. I know you like Vucevic. Yeah. I just, that would be at least one I would explore, but he's not even on the market right now. They're still caught up in trying to trade Zach LaVine. So we'll see what's going on with that.
Somebody in Detroit or San Antonio. Like, I'm thinking Zach Collins, maybe. I think he'd be a nice.
So Zach Collins can't get. So a weird thing with Zach Collins' contract is he can't get traded. And I looked it up the other day and I can't remember why, but he can't get traded.
Because you want him on this team. I think that's pretty obvious.
Yeah, and the NBA is
Collins guy coming out of the draft.
I was. Bojan Bogdanovic, but he's making $20 million. So unless you're willing to move Duncan, and I don't know that that's the swap that you're looking at, that makes much sense. But I think, look, if you're looking for power forward help, it might be the buyout market. Let's not discount that. The Heat also have a $9.4 million trade exception from the Victor Oladipo trade. Now, I don't think that they're going to use that because of where they are relative to the luxury tax. But if they make another cap saving move between now and the deadline, then maybe, depending on how much money they save, that becomes more of an option. But now we're talking about like 2 and 3 steps down the road. Is there something to give in Toronto with like a Thad Young or an Otto Porter? I know not needle movers here, not exciting names, but this is kind of what we're talking about in terms of
an area of need.
An area
Jeff
of
Green
need,
in Houston. Jeff Green, like,
that could be
Miami,
interesting. Is he willing to?
The only team they haven't played here, and he lives here. He lives in South Florida. I'm surprised he hasn't kicked the tires. Yeah, I'm surprised he hasn't kicked the tires on signing here. But it seems like the one team he hasn't played for.
If they buy him out, I just don't know that they would buy him out. They really like him, and that they kind of brought him to try to trade him. So maybe they put him in. So they could trade Jeff Green in a bigger deal. I think Houston's going to be pretty aggressive between now and the deadline. And so if they trade Jeff Green, and then he gets bought out, that's somebody who does make little enough money now where if he were to get bought out. But again, Jeff Green is like a nice player. I don't think he's playing for you in a playoff series, right? And so I think you're looking for, maybe. I mean, he played for the final. He played for the Nuggets in the finals. But like in terms of a closing five, I don't know that that's the guy. So I don't know. We'll see. I think it's going to be interesting. The Heat still open for business even after this Terry Rozier deal. We'll be back with you Wednesday night after the Memphis Grizzlies game with reactions. Hopefully, our first thoughts on what Terry Rozier looks like in a Miami Heat uniform. We'll see what happens there. But for now, thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube and your favorite podcast